Wonderful. Thank you, Marie, and welcome to you all. It's good to see people joining from all over Europe and from India even. It's wonderful. And welcome to this East Nordic Chapter webinar. Today's theme is From Science to Policy, Making Complex Scientific Findings Accessible. This is truly a very important topic, I think, for all of us involved in science and in academic publishing, because science basically is about understanding the world around us, and therefore it's crucial that we are able to convey scientific findings into something understandable for those not directly involved in the scientific process, especially policymakers. And to enlighten us on this topic, we are so lucky as to have Koen Jonkers with us today. He has previously been the editor-in-chief for Joint Research Centre, the European Commission's Science and Knowledge Service, with a mission to bring science and knowledge into EU policy making. And Koen is now head of the Scientific Development Unit of the Joint Research Centre. He has a background in biotechnology, holds a PhD in political science, and is a visiting professor at the College of Europe. His main fields is the dynamics of science, the scientific communication system, and the interaction between science and policy. So, as you understand, there could be no one better placed or more skillful in this field than Koen Jonkers. And after his talk, there will be Q&As, like Mary said, and hopefully we will have a lively discussion. Please write your questions or comments in the Q&A underway so that you will remember them. Well, welcome, Koen. We are so happy that you could join us today, and the floor is yours.
Hello, thank you, Are, for this very nice introduction. I'm not sure if I'm the absolute best speaker for this topic, but I can have a go, and I hope we can have an interactive session today. As you said, I've recently, since a few weeks, changed jobs, so I'm no longer the editor-in-chief, which of the JRC, but I'm now I have a busy new job as head of the Scientific Development Unit, and I'm also the chair of the JRC Scientific Committee, and I'll come back to that a bit later. My idea was today to first say a few words, a few slides on the Joint Research Centre, because I'm not sure if everyone is familiar with the nature of this organization and its role in the EU policymaking context. Then talk about policy developments around science for policy, because there are some, and then focus more on the role of editors, in my case, internal in the JRC, but I think many of these issues also may speak to journal editors. So, and that I hope will kickstart a discussion. Now, I realize I have quite a few slides, so I hope that Ara wouldn't mind sharing his screen and indicating with his hands whether I'm taking too much time on particular topics, so that we can move on more quickly. But I will kickstart, as I said, with the Joint Research Centre. And now I hope. Yes, indeed. So we live in a complex world. We face many challenges, many of which rely on scientific evidence to resolve. And there is an increasing understanding that we need evidence to inform policy making. And there's an understanding, of course, from the scientific world, but also increasingly from policymakers' side and from broader society. Now, the European Commission Joint Research Centre is part of the European Commission. We are a DG, a kind of ministry in the Commission, but we're also a research institute. So we're with our feet in both worlds. We employ around 2,000 scientists, and we cover all fields of science and most fields of science and all fields of Commission policy. Our commissioner, so kind of minister, is pointed here, is Iliana Ivanova, and we also report to Maros Sefcovic, who is currently the Vice President for the European Green Deal, Interinstitutional Relations and Foresight. And that's mainly in our role of providing foresight to European Commission policy making. This slide is a bit old because our current Director General is an acting Director General, is actually Bernard Magenhaan, who has taken over from Stephen Quest, who has taken up a new position. This is the way that below the boxes that you see below is the way that we're organized. You see that we cover different areas, including health and food, nuclear safety, space, security and migration, sustainable resources, and a number of other topics. As I said, we cover all fields of Commission policymaking. Now, we aim to provide independent, evidence-based knowledge and science to support EU policy, and we say we do that. We aim to be policy relevant and be at the cutting edge of science as well. But of course, we don't do much basic science. We do strategic and applied science with a clear focus to inform policymakers. We face challenges that all scientists face and all policymakers face, and we help policymakers to bridge the information deluge, the need for multidisciplinary knowledge. And while doing that, we try to adhere to our standards of having a high degree of scientific integrity and, for example, ensure reproducibility of our outputs. When I say we are independent, I mean to say that we're independent of private, commercial, or national interests. We're not fully independent of the Commission. Our work program is agreed at a political level, and we work for more than 40 European Commission policy departments, but they appreciate that in the way that we do science, so not necessarily our topic selection, but the science that we produce, we have a high degree of independence as well. Now, at present, there is an abundance of knowledge, and much of that is very complex, and a part of that is scientific knowledge, but of course the policy-making process is informed by other areas of knowledge as well. And we play a role in synthesizing this knowledge to make it more useful for policymakers. We are based in 6 sites, including in Brussels, the headquarters, in Belgium, in Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, and Spain. And as I said, we have about 3,000 staff members, of whom 2,000 are active scientists. We have a large number of large-scale research infrastructures, which are open to other scientists who want to make use of them. And we have a budget of around 450 million euros. So we organize our work in portfolios in which we bring together different areas of work, different parts of the Commission to focus of the JRC to focus on integrating this knowledge around broad areas of policy relevance. I list them here, but that's more for sharing later on. You see here, for example, science for security or observing the Earth for policy, that we make use of satellite images to generate knowledge for our colleagues in DG Agriculture or DG Environment or DG Climate. We have a number of competence centers where we provide methodological support both to Commission policymakers, but especially also to our internal colleagues, for example, on foresight or on composite indicators. And we have a number of knowledge centers where we bring together stakeholders from the Commission DGs, from outside, together with our scientists to exchange on, say, the bioeconomy or on territorial policy or on cancer research. Now, we have a great, fairly large degree of policy impact. This is an example of the work that we do on Green Deal targets. And we, for example, do bring together systematic analysis on 50 farming practices, on which we then do an additional a review of meta-analysis in a way so that we can provide the most robust type of evidence to inform policymakers to make their choices. Because what we find is often policymakers are not as interested in the latest piece of empirical research. They want to know what the state of the knowledge in a certain field is, to make sure that they can rely on the robustness of the evidence that is provided. We publish around 1,600 publications a year, of which around 1,100 scientific articles. And these articles attract a fair degree of attention also in the scientific literature. If we look at the top one most cited publications, then we see that around 4% of our publications is in this global top 1%, and 25% is in the top 10% worldwide. And in that sense, at least on these indicators, we compare well with other leading research organizations like Oxford University, Cambridge University, the Cicero or the Max Planck Society. We have a new approach for tracking our policy impact, building on a tool that has recently come to the market, which is called Overton, which collects all the policy documents, at least from the Commission, but also from many national administrations. And we use that to track how many policy documents cite the publications that we make. And in doing so, we also compare ourselves with other organizations to see how well we compare in relative terms. And I can discuss that in more detail if you wish at a later stage. Now, in addition to this quantitative way of assessing policy impact, we also have many more qualitative approaches to assessing our impacts. We, for example, already for 15 years, ask our scientists to provide self-reported impact claims, which are then evaluated by a committee to see how meaningful the impact that we have on the policymaking process in these areas. And on the basis of that and a number of quantitative material and interviews with policymakers, we are also developing impact pathway case studies, of which we currently have around 50 ready, which provide a real in-depth understanding of how the research that we produce is impacting the policymaking process. Now I want to say a few words, quite a few slides, and again, Are, please indicate when I'm taking too long, on the policy developments around the Science for Policy process. First, a few words on the way that we're organized in the JRC. I'm part of a directorate which deals with innovation in science and policymaking. Other units deal with, for example, the EU Policy Lab, which deals with foresight, design, and behavioral insights. We have a Science for Democracy and Evidence in Policymaking, a Science for Modeling, Monitoring, and Evaluation, which does a lot of policy evaluation, but also provides methodological support to the rest of the JRC. And then the unit that I lead, which is the Scientific Development Programs unit, which aims to support novel ideas that generate both bottom-up and which other strategic areas that we identify top-down for knowledge development in the organization to make sure that we remain agile and fit for purpose in the longer term. The body that I used to lead is the JRC Editorial Review Board, which I will discuss in more depth. Another body that I lead at present is the Scientific Committee, which provides strategic advice to the JRC senior management on a number of areas of scientific development, including the setup of a scientific integrity and research ethics framework, of which the Editorial Review Board and an integrity officer is. Now, when we talk about science for policy, we do not talk, at least in the JRC context, on policy for science. This is what DG Research is responsible for, which is a kind of ministry for science and innovation, which fund research. They have a large number of research funding programs. You may be familiar with Horizon Europe. They also are engaged in the planning of science, technology, and innovation system analysis. So they really develop policies for science and innovation, and they do that in consultation with the member states, because we only have partial competence on that. But for example, we aim to help shape in this part of the Commission the formation of a European research area, a kind of marketplace for research within the European context. But as I said, that is not our prime target today. We talk more about science for policy, and that is what the Joint Research Centre is responsible for. And when I talk about science for policy, I mean informing any public policy with up-to-date scientific evidence, leaving final policy decisions to politicians or policymakers. So we don't live in a technocracy, so we don't determine what the policy should be, but we will provide scientific knowledge, policy options, risk assessments, and contacts with the wider scientific community to make sure, or to help ensure, that these policies are based on the best available evidence. Now, normally scientists are reactive stakeholders and they function at the demand of policymakers, but they can also be more proactive. And in the JRC, we often engage in a co-creation process with policymakers to make sure that the evidence that we provide best meets their needs. Now, science and policy can be seen as two different worlds, and I normally use a different image in this. This the continent, the gap between two continental plates in Iceland. Science is about understanding the world. It's problem oriented. It's based on investigation, experiment, and discovery. It emphasizes precision and selection towards the truth. It's independent of context, and there is a high tolerance for failure and risk. Policy, on the other hand, is about managing the world. It's service-oriented. It's based on dialogue and judgment, and it involves a process of reconciliation of different viewpoints and compromising to come to a final conclusion. It is context-specific, and there's less tolerance for failure and risk than in the world of science. Now, organizations like the JRC and scientists who want to influence policy have to bridge this gap. And for that, you have specialists, but you also often active scientists play a role in that process as well. Now, the COVID crisis brought to the fore that the complexity of the science for policy process, but it is not the only area where this is evident. We are increasingly confronted by a number of very complex, wicked problems, ranging from climate change, aging society, epidemics like COVID, world hunger, and the challenges to democracy that we are currently facing in some parts of Europe as well. Now, what we can learn from the COVID-19 pandemic is that in our European member states, there is an uneven level of research and advice that can inform the policymaking process. And we also learned that the evidence that was provided was patchy, sometimes contradictory, and often confusing, which with as a result that there was a different messaging and also different policies adopted in the member states. And that was one of the reasons for developing a more European-wide, or at least a Commission-wide approach to supporting evidence policymaking in the member states with scientific research, which was based on a shared vision for science for policy and an analysis of both the state of play and the gaps, and aims to promote both a national and a European debate on how the science for policy process can best be organized. We basically identify three main challenges. One of them is the institutional environment, missing connections and coordination. Individual capacities, so there may be missing competences, and there may be missing intersectoral understanding, both on the science side and on the policy side. And there's also another challenge has to do with good governance of evidence use and limits to the science, to both science and policy making, and the process of interacting between them. Now, if we talk about institutional capacity and professional network building, we can identify quite a broad number of actors who are involved in this science for policy ecosystem, and that includes very clearly academics, individual researchers, universities and research institutes, high-profile scientists which act as advisors to policymakers, learned societies and academies which also often play an advisory role, brokering programs and policy fellowships, think tanks and consultancies, which provide evidence to the policymaking process as well, more or less based on scientific research, expert commissions, councils and committees. Many countries have chief science advisors and government-employed scientists who inform the policymaking process. And there's also, in many countries, parliamentary advisory units and parliamentary libraries where politicians can build on. There's also unique funding programs which focus on the science for policy ecosystem. What we did was as I said, we tried to map the current state of play in the European member states, and we organized a number of workshops with a large number of participants to do that. And we tried to map the science for policy ecosystem in each of the European member states. We worked with DG Reform on a project in 7 member states, where we also heavily collaborated with the OECD to see if we could offer more systematic support to this science for policy advice system. We also develop competence frameworks, which may be interesting for both scientists and for policymakers to see what kind of skills they need to be effective interlocutors between scientific research and policymakers. And these are all freely available in case you want to experiment yourself and see to which extent you have all the competences which we identified on the basis of large consultations as being important skill sets for scientists to have. As I said, we also build a competence framework for policymakers, because also policymakers need a skill set to make optimal use of the science that is provided to them. In addition, we have done other support activity. We have a 2-day course, an introduction to science for policy, which is available on the European Academy platform, and it's a good course which guides you through a number of steps which we make available to all our scientists in the JRC to help prepare them for their interaction with policymakers. But as I said, it is useful. It could potentially be useful to scientists across Europe and beyond. This Science for Policy Handbook, which we published a couple of years ago, comes with a 10-step guide with quick tips on how to be more effective as a scientist in informing policymakers that you may be interested in going through as well. And I'll come with a list of resources midway through this presentation that I'm happy to share with you later on as well. Now, there's also limits to the science for policy process ourselves. As I said before, we live in democracies. Our policies are not determined by science, as you might have if you organize your society in a more technocratic form. And we have to understand that there's limits, or limits not, but we have to understand the policymaking process and how policymakers operate and digest scientific knowledge themselves as well. And for this reason, we have teamed up with a large number of experts around the world in different fields, different social science fields, behavioral experts, psychologists, philosophers, to write 2 highly readable reports that I would recommend if anyone wants to get into this field to read. They're available on our website. The first is Understanding Our Political Nature, which tries to kickstart this discussion and see how policymakers behave and what the limits are of them, their biases and their ability to absorb the knowledge that is provided. And that is very much tied to the second report, which tries to analyze how values and identities affects the extent to which policymakers and people in the broader society are susceptible to the evidence that is provided to them. We also build capacity to promote exercises for participatory and deliberative democracy. And currently we are we have recently published a report on ethical communication, on ethical scientific communication and ethical communication of policies. So that also ties into this area. The support for science for policy in the European Union has developed quite rapidly in the last 2 years. As I said, there was a Commission document in the end of October 2020, which led through a number of additional steps to Council conclusions during the Spanish presidency on this science for policy process. Because there is a clear momentum for innovative policy making and science for policy, not only at the EU level, but also within the member states. This is partially, we have a process of better regulation, which has scientific evidence as a cornerstone, which aims to ensure that all our policies undergo both ex ante and ex post impact assessments to see what works and how these policies can be improved. And this is based on then mainly economic, but also other forms of scientific assessments. Within the new era, there is a policy framework which is co-created with member states for research and innovation to ensure both knowledge valorization, intersectoral research mobility, feedback loops to policy, and an increasing focus on impact-oriented research. This is some of the sources that I introduced earlier, and these are links which I hope work. Perhaps not on this video, but I can share the presentation later on, including this 10 tips for researchers to more effectively engage with policymakers that I mentioned earlier, as well as the training courses that I alluded to. Now I come to the section on editorial review, which is hopefully most directly related to your work. As I said, I was the editor-in-chief of the Joint Research Center, chairing the Editorial Review Board, which is responsible for organizing an internal peer review process to make sure that, in addition to our articles, which undergo peer review by the journals that we submit them to, also our science for policy and technical reports undergo a process of internal scrutiny before they're made public. This editorial review board is part of the Scientific Integrity and Research Ethics Framework, which, in addition to the editorial review board, is comprised of the scientific committee, a research ethics board, which screens all our projects and gives ethical clearance, and an integrity counselor, which helps resolve any research integrity conflicts or issues that are present in the organization. Now, the editorial review board is responsible for organizing the review of the 1,600 manuscripts we publish annually, of which we wrote roughly 500 reports and 1,100 articles. We draw on around 400 reviewers from across the organization, many of whom do multiple reviews, so that the number of reviews is many-fold higher. What we did after 3 years of operation was to do a content review of all the reviewer comments that we had received so far. And that was a very large exercise of around a qualitative assessment of around now I don't remember whether it was 30,000 comments or 3,000 comments, but in any case, a large number to identify what kind of comments they were focused on, and that's is presented here in the type of questions that we ask our reviewers to respond to, and that has to do with the title of the manuscript, whether the purpose and scope is clearly described, whether the level of content is appropriate and sufficient. And here on the right-hand side, you see the share of the comments that reviewers provided on each of these issues. Language and layout received a high number of comments, and for that reason, we have decided to provide additional proofreading and editorial support. The abstract and the summaries have to be clear and descriptive, and there were a number of comments on that as well. And then there's also more methodological questions, whether the design and methodology is state-of-the-art, is well documented, appropriate and clearly described, whether the conclusions, options, and recommendations are based on solid evidence, and whether they're clearly explained. And on the basis of this broad overview, we went into each of these different topics. And for example, on language and presentation, we have comments focusing on different aspects. But they're not necessarily, they're very important when you want to convey your messages and attract, have an impact on your readership. But we also pay special attention to more methodological aspects. For example, there were also a fair number of comments on the transparency with which the results were presented, including on methods and statistics or general methodological comments. Then also very important from our perspective, but also I suppose for more scientific audiences, is that we think it's important that the products that we produce are neutral in tone and neutral in content. So we pay attention to whether there are, for example, potential biases or mixing of opinions and facts, and if so, we come back to the authors to help make sure that that's addressed. Also, when some statements are not fully sufficiently substantiated, we come back to our authors on that. Now, having run for 3 or 4 years, we decided that we had some material to share. And we were interested also to learn from other international organizations and national organizations to see how they organize the quality control process of their own publications. So we organized a workshop where we involved a large number of international organizations like the OECD, the World Bank, UNESCO, the FAO, the International Labour Organization, and CERN. As well as European organizations. And I realize that these acronyms probably are less meaningful for you, but it's the European Parliamentary Research Service, the European Central Bank, the European Environmental Agency, the ECDC that you are probably more familiar with, the European Food Safety Authority, as well as some national organizations such as the National Institute for Standards and Technology in the US, or the Center for the Spanish Research Council in Spain. Now, I can share this workshop report with you if you wish, but one of the main outcomes of this workshop was the creation of a network. And building on that network, we are organizing a series of workshops, for example, on generative AI in publishing, the challenges that people identified, that these organizations identified, the extent to which it is used, and the way that we expect to use these tools in the future. We recently had a workshop on knowledge synthesis, and we probably will have another workshop on diversity in publications later on this year. Now, for journal editors, and I come close to the end of this presentation, and I realize, yeah, I'm close to the 40 minutes that was allotted to me. Some questions that I wanted to pose to you is deal with the type of support and review that you offer to your authors. So of course, we do review on scientific content, but perhaps there is also scope for making sure that the material that we publish is sufficiently accessible for different types of audiences. The guidelines that we present to our audiences, we in the JRC have clear guidelines for different types of policy documents to make sure that they follow a certain structure, but also in terms of content, we can offer guidelines. You may consider whether new products, new knowledge products, in addition to articles and reviews and notes, will help you target specific policy audiences. I know that there's quite a few journals which are experimenting with type of outputs which are more science for policy oriented in nature, and we can interact with that on that in greater detail later on. We are currently experimenting with collaborating with more science news platforms. For example, The Conversation is a platform that you may be familiar with, to see whether we can reach broader audiences with our scientific content, and by reaching broader audiences, that can also be often a good channel for then indirectly targeting policymakers. We've had a lot of discussion on whether we should engage in preprints and whether we should publish working papers. We know that often articles which have been preceded by preprints and working papers tend to have a higher impact in the scientific literature, but we also think that there are potential risks in communicating on research that has not yet been peer-reviewed. So we provide guidance on ethical communication of these type of outputs to our staff. And I'm also very interested in how you, as editors of journals, deal with the opportunities and challenges that AI and GPT like tools pose to you as journal editors and in the quality control process. And with that, I think I've reached the end of my presentation. Because I wanted to remain fairly short so that we have enough space for discussion and debate amongst us. This is a slide that we're always asked to include in all our presentations that we are hiring. And of course, everything that I have said should not be construed as the opinion of the European Commission or the EU institutions. They are my inputs, and if anyone is to be held responsible, it should be me alone. So thank you very much for your attention, and I want to close the presentation now and open the floor for comments, discussion, and questions. But I think that this can be an open discussion in which we can all engage. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Koen, for a very comprehensive and interesting presentation. Now we open for questions and comments. And Mary, you might maybe want to open for everyone. Well, I see you have already done. Wonderful. So just if you want to speak, raise a question or a comment, please raise your hand and I'll try to see it. While we wait for the first one, Koen, I'm just wondering, you have the 10, what did you call them? The 10 tips for scientists, how to communicate. In your view, what do you think is the most effective? Is it to develop the science literacy in policymakers, or is it to educate the scientists in better science communication, or should maybe the translation be with professional communicators?
That's a complex question. I think we need all three pillars basically. So it is. I think it is for scientists who want to influence policy. It is first and foremost important that you develop a set of skills that allow you to write in a way that is digestible for policymakers. And there's apart from publications in scientific journals, there are many other ways of presenting your work in a format that is relevant for that is digestible and accessible for policymakers. Now, since not all scientists in Europe will have direct access to policymakers, there's also an important role to play for intermediary organizations which synthesize the knowledge that is out there and do a translating step towards the policymaking process. And the JRC, as being at the interface of science and policy, can play an important role for that at the European level. But there are similar bodies often in member states which can also do that. And for individual scientists, that may be an important point of call as well to make that bridge to the policy making. They may digest the knowledge that is out there, but also for them, it's often useful if that material is there in an accessible form. Then for policymakers, we also think, at least in the European Commission, that it's important to train our policymakers to be better able to make use of science, even if it is presented to them in a concise and digestible format. They have to be aware of what uncertainties mean, for example, and to understand what the limits of the evidence that is provided is. So we try to present that clearly, of course, in the material that we provide them with, but a certain literacy, science literacy among policymakers is also very important.
Well, thank you. And then we have a question from Joe Wixon. Maybe you would like to post that question yourself. Just unmute, please.
Hi there. Hi, Koen. I'm from the publisher Wiley. I work in our external analysis, so strategic team. You were mentioning about potentially discussing AI in your network, and obviously a lot of people are focused on the risks, but we also think there are some benefits there. And there's been a lot of talk about its ability to translate non-English language content and potentially give that more airtime and more opportunity to be used and deployed perhaps in policy making. So it struck me, as a European body, what efforts do you make right now to make sure that it's not just English language content that's influencing the policy making process?
That's a very good point. So we are not we do see, of course, potential risks of the use of AI in the development of publications and in the development of, but we're not at least in the JRC, we also see the potential benefits, very much so. And for that reason, we have set up an internal a GPT service so that our colleagues, initially in the JRC, but now also the rest of our policy colleagues in the policy DGs, can make use of these GPT tools in a safe environment without sharing sensitive content to outside companies. And that is used very actively, and we use that for also for our research work. We see a lot of potential there, both for analysis purposes. For example, the example I gave of the systematic reviews of meta-analysis, that process can be sped up very much, or hopefully very much, by using AI-related tools, and therefore we are also exploring to which extent we can have more tailored GPT-like tools that are based purely on scientific inputs, not on all the knowledge that is out there on the internet. But beyond that, also from an editorial perspective, of course, there's great scope for using these tools to improve the quality of language and to make the language that is produced more tailored to specific audiences. And one of these aspects is, as you rightly pointed out, translation, so that we can help ensure that people who are non-native English speakers can draft better text in English. But personally, I also think it is very useful to make my own French language skills, for example, more up to scratch, and I find that very useful also.
Mm. Well, thank you. And then Christopher de Jonge has a question, please. You could just unmute. And well, now I can't find him. He's supposed to be here somewhere. Well, then I'll post that question for him. He writes, how does one balance emerging global health concerns, latest data that support urgency for attention, and still satisfy the desire for a broad view approach? That is ground level versus up in the air view.
So that's a complex question. So
yeah, there's Christopher. Maybe you want to elaborate on that.
It really harkens back to the beginning of the conversation when science is being presented for policy, and it relates to what Koen said quite early on, in that it's not the devil in the details, but it's the broader approach. And so my question really comes from my interests, my field of reproductive health. And it is an emerging global issue that is compounded by many other things, climate change, the environment, etc. And so when you're talking about taking the scientific evidence that's emerging and you want to present that such that it could formulate policy, you don't, if I heard you right, you don't want the devil in the details, you want the umbrella.
Yes.
How do you balance that?
Well, it's a difficult question, difficult challenge. I think I said often policymakers are more interested in having the most robust state-of-the-art rather than the latest piece of empirical evidence, and that's true. But we also do a lot of foresight work, for example, and there we often focus more on weak signals and on and we are also very much focused on emerging trends both in science and in technology. And more in that type of work, it can also, if there's something that is rapidly emerging, and that probably is then often more than a single paper, unless that paper has a very, very big impact. It can also be important to have these individual new pieces of knowledge to inform the policymaking process. But what I meant to say is that often for the policymakers, it is more useful to have this broad understanding of and also confidence in the scientific state of the art on the topic, the scientific consensus on a topic to base their policy on, because otherwise the risk of basing a policy decision on the wrong piece of evidence becomes too high. And as I said also in my presentation, the tolerance for risk is less high in a policymaking arena than it is in some other fields. That doesn't mean that we are not interested in weak signals to alert policymakers to emerging issues and to emerging health threats. For example, we have a whole system of tracking also public media incidences of health threats around the world, and we use that to inform the WHO, the European Commission, on on emerging threats in the health sphere or in the terrorism sphere or in other spheres as well. So that's and if your paper is picked up in a large number, your highly novel paper is picked up in a large number of outlets, that might come in through that channel as well.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Enjoyed your talk.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. And that leads me on to another question. You mentioned for us editors the possibility to review for accessibility. That was something new for me. What do you mean by that, and how do you think that could be done?
So we put a lot of effort in our reports to make sure that they're digestible. So our foremost task is to make sure that the quality of the science is robust and good, and that is what you would normally ask your reviewers in a journal as well. But perhaps there is a role, especially if you're more interested in reaching other audiences as well, to provide support to authors, and whether reviewers are the best place to do that, or whether you have more dedicated professionals doing that, to make sure that the articles that you want to target a broader audience are written in a way, or have an abstract that is a layman's abstract that is written in an accessible manner, to increase the uptake of these findings by broader audiences, including policymakers.
Well, thank you. Any more questions or comments are welcome in the Q&A, or just by unmuting and start talking. That's also a possibility. Like Joe Wixon.
Thank you, Koen. I was just going to say that the SDG Publishers Compact Fellows, which is a multi-stakeholder group of librarians, publishers, sustainability researchers, are very much going along that line that you just described, of trying to encourage journals to ask their authors to write plain language summaries, or even policymaker-facing bullets or practitioner-facing bullets that are really digestible, don't require them to read the 10-page scientific paper, and let them get going on what they need to do and what they need to know. And we've written a couple of guides that are freely available for journals to adopt, so we're trying to build a bit more momentum behind that. But I still do wonder, though, even with that, is that still too much of a fire hose for a policy advisor or a policy team to pick through? And is it really still the synthesis and the systematic views that are more critical? And how do we get from there being too much to getting that balance right? I'm just interested in your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think you're right in stating that there's very few policymakers who read scientific journals, even if they contain these plain language summaries. That is a good point. But when you have these products, when you have a summary, you can use that for other ends. You can reach broader audiences. So that requires then a proactive approach to make sure that material is brought to the attention of other publics. Because policymakers are extremely busy normally, at least in the European context, and they will not have time to read your 10 pages, but they will not even pick up the journal to identify it.
That is, really. I have tried using AI to make these plain language summaries, and that's actually one of the very good things about AI. They are quite good at that. I even made a review article in the format of a haiku poem with an AI, and it worked in a way. So that's a short format for politicians.
And maybe building on that, and I'm going to leave. I'm going to leave in 3 minutes because I have another meeting to chair. We also have a Sci Art project, and building on the haiku, there's potential there as well. But that's an aside. I do think that there is great potential in these AI tools to help us bridge both to synthesize knowledge, but also to make sure that material becomes more accessible. But it remains, at least from our perspective, essential that there is human oversight in that. So we can use AI tools to create these language summaries, but then you as an author have the responsibility to make sure that everything that is in there is actually correct and gives a fair representation of the work that you wanted to present.
That's an important point, of course. Well, I see no more questions in the Q&A, and we have 1 minute to go, so I think we'll use that minute to say thank you very much to Koen Jonkers. This was really interesting. And since Mary has made a recording, you can also see this at a later time if you want. And please do come back to our EASE web pages to see if there's any other webinars you might be interested in attending. We have a lot of them. Thank you so much, Koen.
Thank you, Ira. Thank you again for the presentation. I enjoyed the exchange.